Okay,
Yes, it's 7 o'clock. I have on my computer, so we'll start the Wednesday, January 20th, 2021 Wetlands Commission, 7 o'clock. And first item on the agenda is under new business, show cause hearing, 1179 Farmington Avenue.
okay. I believe we've got the owner and all his representatives on the phone, I believe. George, do you want to go ahead and I've got the sketch and I have your letter, so I'm happy to toggle between the two, and I can pull up aerial maps if we need to, but I thought if you wanted to start, and then we have Ed on the phone that can offer some comments.
I don't know if Bill needed to say anything before we start.
No, I think you can get right into it, George.
Okay, great. All right. So as promised, we have the next generation evolution of the plan based on some discussions. Oh, by the way, this is George Logan, Rema Ecological Services for Mr. Miziarski. So at any rate, this is what we have, and you see the plan there, and there's two plans there. That's the bigger scale one, and then we have a smaller scale, or is it the other way around? I always get confused with that. Anyhow, the other one's a 20 scale. And there's also a colorized version, which looks very similar to what I had shown the commission the previous time. So this is the next step, and we had a little back and forth with Mr. Pollack and with Shannon about what to expect, and we realized that we have a little ways to go, but we thought that we needed to put some effort forward in addressing some of the concerns, some of the comments that we got the last time. So we also included in this letter a couple of other issues sort of on the side. One had to do with what we've been calling Wetland B, and the other one had to do with the Hall Road, but I think put those for the side for the moment. So as far as the first thing that we heard from the commission and from Mr. Pollack is that we should go forth and completely restore the wetland. So as you recall, the previous time we had about 4,500 square feet of wetland restoration, and now which is shown on the plan is the entire 6,175 square feet. We've gone from a 15-foot demarcation buffer around the restored wetland to 25 feet, with a little bit of a caveat, and that is, as I remember Chairman Hannon had discussed this whole thing about how steep the grade was going to be within the demarcation buffer going up. And honestly, I cannot tell you 100% what its slope is going to be, but what I said there is not going to be any steeper than 3 to 1, which goes for a stable slope. And the note was, well, the note that I put here is that we would make sure that we had a 3 to 1, and if that meant that this buffer extended further out into the field, then so be it. So we would have a 3 to 1. However, in thinking about it, I figured that for the next iteration, if we to move forward with this plan, I could go back and look at some of the data from my exploratory trenches and do some measurements, and I could figure out whether or not the 25-foot would be sufficient for a 3 to 1 slope, or if we had to go further out. So that's something for next time. What we decided to do is to, instead of having 2 wetland creation areas, so okay, the wetland is going to be fully restored that was impacted, but then you remember that we had about 3,000 some square feet of potential wetlands that were currently isolated wetlands that were currently under the piles of soil on the far eastern portion. And so assuming that those were indeed wetlands, we had to obviously do something about that. So here on the west side of Wetland A, we have a wetland creation area, and that's approximately 9,600 square feet. I did go out there, and you can see from the pictures that I included that what we expected to find, we did find, and that is that compact silt loam to very fine sandy loam at somewhere between 27 and 29 inches, depending on which side of the soil pit you were looking at, below the surface, which is what is also the same layer as we've seen that has allowed for the hydrology of wetland A to be there and for that wetland to be created, back a few years back. One of the things that we also did, and this is something that Mr. Pollack suggested, is to create some areas that would have seasonal flooding. And so we did that. And the way that I did this contouring here is, instead of, because we don't know what the actual elevation is there, we would have probably to drag out a transit all the way here to have the exact elevation. So what I did is I said, okay, 0 is the existing surface. And so for us to get down into that layer or be above it, down into it for the sumps and above it for the rest of the created wetland, we're going to go and up to final 3 feet below surface. And what I said in my report is that we're actually going to go down 4 feet on average. And that is to accommodate for a foot or more, if you include compaction, of select topsoil, which we will enrich with some organics, probably some compost or similar materials, so we can have a certain amount percentage of organic matter. And that's something that you would see in the final plans. We show roughly where test pits A and B are. We show from the photos kind of roughly where they are. By the way, kind of aside, surprisingly, and I included one photo, there's been a tremendous amount of beaver activity out there. I don't know where they're going with these saplings, but they're cutting down cottonwoods up to 4 inches, possibly a little more. And they're dragging the entire tree away, far away, and I don't even know where they are. I'm assuming it's somewhere down by the pond. But that was amazing to me, that so much has been done since the last time I was there, where they didn't leave one trace behind except for these little stubs showing up. So I guess we're not planting cottonwoods. So that's one thing that I discovered. So that's what you see there. Now, one of the things that I also showed, which I discussed previously at the demarcation, at the edge of the demarcation buffer, is first we talked about some eastern red cedars, which is probably one of my favorite plants, and also bayberries. And so we decided to do a staggered row where say one row would be bayberries and intermixed with, so you have the upper row being, say, eastern cedars and the lower row being bayberries. And so we had a number of those, 36 of one species, 36 of the other. You have about 420 feet or so of demarcation buffer. So that was another one. And of course, we can't forget, we still have it on the plan, that there was a little dense concentration of invasive species in that one spot. Now, that's estimated. Could be larger by the time we get there. To remove Japanese knotweed and multiflora rose, which, of course, if we don't, we're going to have a problem in the future, especially on the Japanese knotwood. Let's see, what else can I tell you about this? I think that's it. I don't know, Shannon, if you want to bring up the letter and show some of the pictures and maybe that colorized version of the so-called 40% plan. Might be 42%, I don't know, something like that. Probably call it a progress plan. So there it is. So that gives you an idea of what it looks like on that aerial photograph. Yeah, and you've seen the photographs, I believe, and there's nothing really else to talk about out there. Now, it's the way that I figured out the edge of this 9,600 square feet is just by using first the aerial photograph and then giving it to the a CAD operator to put it in. However, and it might end up being a little larger because there is a slope on the east side of an earthen berm. And I was envisioning that we'd probably go to the toe of the slope, which kind of would make sense. And that might make it slightly larger. But anyhow, that's kind of, I don't think the berm is, yep, right there. Now, I don't know if this line is correct that Shannon is showing, or the one that is the edge of the, but that's, I believe, something that we're going to have to figure out before the final plan is concerned. So we might have to take a few shots out there. I also would like to take a few shots within the general restoration area. Now, there's one thing that I keep forgetting about, and Shannon, you might be able to help me with this. At some point, last year, we produced, or at least that's my recollection, we produced a report regarding the rest of the fill area to the north. Did I ever submit that to you?
With the soil samples, so the
Yes.
soil and
Yes, I did.
I believe it's some information that came in December, if I'm correct.
Correct. All right.
I don't know. So yes, we have. So anything you submitted, and I think I've shared with you and with the commission, the SharePoint site that's been set up for this.
Oh,
So
okay.
all the documents that we had and all the documents that you've generated and Ed's letter are all there. So everything is up on the SharePoint site. I'm pretty sure I had shared the link with you folks so that
You probably did, but I was probably lost in a sea of emails and couldn't find it.
I can, do you want it now? I know.
Not it now, but I'll probably remind you tomorrow when I think of it. But the reason I'm bringing that up because one of the questions was, what are we doing with the rest of the land? And so that report addresses it, addresses continued effort to eradicate or control invasives in that area, and also some select seeding for a number of reasons. One, obviously, we don't want erosion to go down to anything that is there now or we would be doing in the future. So that's kind of where I'm at with and I don't know if there are any questions from the commission before I talk about the other two items that I brought up.
I don't know, Bob, do you want to take questions now, or do you want to hear the full presentation and then go through with questions? Mr. Hannon.
Go through the full presentation.
Okay.
Certainly, I'll do that. So the other two items that I put in here is 2.0 and 3.0 of the report. Regarding what we're requesting is to fill wetland B. I know this is a little bit of a sensitive matter. I realize that because we did see some amphibian breeding activity back in the spring from eastern toads, and then we saw at least green frogs back in there as the season progressed. However, I did include some aerial photographs, and these are some drone photographs that were supplied to me by Mizzy that in my mind conclusively show that Area B was actually, if you will, a sedimentation area or trap. There was a channel that's very obvious in that picture, and another one that was dug to bring water exactly to that point. And so that's how, and I remember going in there and finding some of that finer sediment that was there before I hit the red stuff underneath, which we've seen, which is the dense stuff that was there before. So this was obviously, in my mind, an area that was created as part of this operation. And so our thought was that now that its life purpose is gone by, and before this breeding again come late March, to fill that, grade it out with the rest of the area, and then we're creating similar, if not better, habitat in our new creation area. So that was one thing that I wanted to bring up and see what the commission, what their thoughts are on that. And the second one had to do with the pre-existing haul road. This was another one that we had said that in our thought, and we had provided some aerial photographs that we thought were clear enough that the haul road did go through exactly through the area that we're going to restore. But I know I was using 3 different years of aerial photographs and trying to match them up, and you know, the lines were a little wonky one way or the other. So then I found these drone shots that were done, and they were done literally days before the filling or destruction of that portion of wetland A. And I think, in my mind at least, especially if you see the edge of trees, how it's one straight line that goes through, and you kind of match that with the previous aerial photographs that I had provided, such as the one from February 2020, and then the ones that we provide here, it seems clear to me that that was the case, that the pre-existing haul road, which was quite rutted, as you can see, from trucks, probably large trucks, went right through this area that we're going to restore. Again, not a tremendous big issue, but I know there was a little confusion and possibly a little dispute. We're going to be restoring that area anyhow, so in a way that's a moot point, but we thought we'd bring it up. So those are the 3 items: the plan, the pre-existing haul road, and the filling of wetland B prior to this year's breeding activity.
Okay.
And that concludes my presentation.
Okay.
George, I have a question for you. In looking at these drone photos, so like the one that's up right now, use that as an example. So that was taken January 20th, 2020.
Yep.
Now, the soil was moved from where it is on the right-hand side and moved to the left-hand side up to and including the haul road.
That's right.
Okay, Robert, you may need to help me on this, but what happened with all of the trees and wood that were on that site? Was that removed or was that buried in place?
That I do not know. I don't know who could answer that question. I would assume that if you wanted a stable, you know, surface, that those would have been removed. But that's probably a question for Mr. Misiorowski.
And the reason I'm asking is because it looks like it could be more than 10 cubic yards. So that's why I want to make sure Robert's sort of thinking the same way I am on this.
Bob, this is Robert Eiser. Yeah, I mean, looking at the photo, it certainly looks like there's tree debris which would be classified under this Connecticut Solid Waste Management Regulations as solid waste. So you're correct. 10 cubic yards would be a threshold for creating a solid waste landfill if that material was left in place.
We
I just
probably would
wanted
have.
to bring that up as part of the discussion because that's what the photos are showing. There's a lot of wood there. So that may be something that you need to follow up on to see what was done with a lot of the wood that was dropped in place out there. So
Can I speak, gentlemen?
sure.
Yeah, I recall when we did our last site walk that if you go back to the area of wetland B, and remember the path of the roadway that leads down to the river? Yeah, right in there. Somewhere in that approximate area, when we were just out there in November, there was a large amount of wood that was lying there. So that may be the wood. I don't know if we have another, if there's any other pictures that would show it, but I clearly remember there being piles of wood that had been moved there. I don't know if maybe some of the earlier pictures we can look at in the SharePoint site and try to find it, or else just go out there and see that it's there.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm bringing up the issue is because if the wood was in fact buried there, that may have created a different problem that is unaffiliated with the wetlands issue. So I'm just raising that issue because the information has been provided to us about the photos, and I'm seeing a lot of wood that's lying out there, and I would just like to know if that wood was removed, like you say, maybe it was moved to the front of the property. If that's the case, fine. But if it was buried on site, to me it looks, right, I can't say exactly, but to me it looks like more than 10 cubic yards, which creates a landfill scenario that has not been licensed. So I'm just raising that issue. So somebody's going to need to look at that from your side just to see what was done with that wood.
Okay. I'll take on that.
And it may be a simple answer. You know, I'm not saying it isn't, but if it was buried in place, that creates a different issue that's going to have to be addressed. Maybe not so much through us, but at least another entity in the state. So I know, Robert, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, as you noted, Bob, it's just those are the statutory definitions for land clearing debris and solid waste disposal area. And Mr. Chairman, I'll note that Commissioner Simpson sent a chat that he has entered the meeting at 7:20 in case you or Shannon didn't see that.
I did see it. Thank you, though.
Thank you.
All right. So, Emily, you're here today, aren't you?
I am.
You get
Hi.
to go first today.
Oh
Do you have any
God.
questions, things you want to bring up?
I mean, I'm very interested in the disposal concern. I have some frog questions I'm working up, but I'd like you to come. Would you mind coming back to me? I get a lot of going first anxiety.
That's fine.
Thank you so much, Bob.
We can move on to Dave.
Oh, thanks. I'm gonna throw him under the bus.
Yeah, I guess I have a couple of questions. I would like to hear from Ed about his reaction to this board plan. Going from 15 to 25 is a step in the right direction. I think there was talk last time of maybe looking for 50 feet. I understand that that this buffer is just for the present, and when in the future some development proposal comes in, we would have a chance to look at appropriate buffer for whatever activity is being proposed. I was just a little bit concerned that if we do establish a 25-foot buffer here, that the pressure will be to not expand it during some future application. So I think that should be kept in mind as we proceed here. I guess that's about it for now. Thank you.
Anything about Wetland B or the other comment that was made?
I guess Wetland B being a year old at most, and man-made, if those two sump areas in the created wetlands can replace that habitat, it's certainly in a better place. So I'm not overly concerned about that.
Okay, and Shannon, I want to go back to you for a second on the Wetland B. wasn't that part of the dialogue in terms of where the concrete barrier was supposed to be placed?
Correct, Bob, that was part of the dialogue during the last meeting. And we specifically said we were gonna try and stake that barrier between Wetland B and the piles so that Mr. Mirzajewski had access to those piles. But staff has issued the revised enforcement order to allow the activities that were discussed at the meeting earlier in January. And but at this point, to my knowledge, those barriers haven't been put in place. We had specifically requested that we be notified so that we could be on site when they go in place. But to my knowledge, they haven't been placed. So that leaves this open for discussion with respect to that for the commission.
Yeah, we were gonna contact you, Shannon, next week about doing that.
Okay,
It hasn't been done yet.
thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was thinking clearly on this because I thought that was the last discussion that we had, is that the barriers were supposed to be moved to accommodate Wetland B. So that was on the east side of where the concrete barrier would go.
Yeah, you got it. Let me see if I can. There we go. So this shows the barriers, and I've got to see, so this one did not show Wetland B. Give me one
I think
sec.
that was located to the east.
It was, I just, so here, so we've got to put the aerial together. So I think if I recall, I used the edge of the pond as the reference.
Okay.
So we've got the edge of pond, and Wetland B basically shows up, and you can see these two, the two piles. And so it should lines up with the edge of pond. And then if we click back to where the barrier, so edge of pond, there's certainly a heavy contour here. So we were loosely discussing that Wetland B was somewhere in this proximity. We're just trying to compare the two documents. So yes, we had discussed kicking the barriers down so that it left access to this material, but still protected the wetland. As I noted that and Attorney Galsky confirmed the barriers haven't been put in yet, so that work hasn't taken place.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I was thinking clearly on this and had the right picture in my head. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Dave, is there anything else?
I guess that's it for now. Just overall concern about the buffer area and not limiting the buffer when we do at some point in the future look at development of the site.
Okay. Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, as Commissioner Fox said, I'll be interested to hear, Ed's take on the most recent report. I think from the overview that was provided by George, it's good to hear that Wetland A is going to be fully restored. On Wetland B, I think, could be okay for the proposed filling. I'd want to hear sort of Ed's take on the functional value. I think when we were out on the site walk, it looked like it was supporting some amphibian life. So it's what was recently created and made its value. If it's low, filling could be okay as part of the overall plan, recognizing there's going to be enhancements in mitigation elsewhere. I also agree with Commissioner Fox that going from 15 feet to 25 feet as the buffer distance is good. But I also have that same concern that if we establish 25 feet, is the buffer, it may be difficult to increase that. So maybe looking to increase it out to 50 feet now would be prudent on our part. And the Hall Road discussion seemed fair. It looked like the explanation was fine, and the proposal to restore that seemed good at this point. That's the end of my comments.
All right, thank you. Mark?
Hang on, I gotta
I think
tinker.
it's just audio, right?
Yeah, I gotta tinker with this microphone. There, I think you're all set, Mark.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yep, you are.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm not going to have any questions, but I would say a discussion about the wetland B. I think I agree with my fellow commissioners that it probably is not an area of concern about restoring it to a more natural state. I think I remember one of the somebody mentioned it was the amphibians went in there. We were kind of like they take advantage of the. And I don't know if the word is advantage, but they. It was convenient for them to do what they did there. So if we can put up another wetland area nearby, they would probably utilize that equally as they are using wetland B at the present time. So if it moves, that would be fine, but I would like to see maybe another area where they can reestablish themselves, maybe the best way to put it. That's all.
All right, thank you. Ned? I know I heard him earlier.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
I was muted, sorry. The wetland creation area is, you got 9,600 square feet. And I want to know, what is the approximate area of wetland B? Do we know that?
Probably about 1,000 to 1,200 square feet.
Okay. And is this still going to be out of the floodplain, the wetland creation area? Because I would think could.
Yeah, it is. I think you can see in that map that we have in front of us right now that the line at the bottom of the screen that's dashed dark,
Yeah.
That's the floodplain elevation. So that's how close it
Okay.
gets,
Okay.
but no further.
The thing.
All right. Yeah, okay, yeah, there it is. Okay, I see. Okay, so you're gonna be well out of that. Yeah, I would just kind of go along with the feeling that, if we increase the wetland area with the creation area substantially over what the wetland B is, then, we might be able to live with filling in wetland B. Like you say, the timing of it is important. I'd like to see it before anything started to take place in the springtime. But that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thanks. Guy?
Also muted. I really don't have any questions at this time.
All right, thanks. Question for you on wetland B. If I'm understanding the dialogue correctly, this was like a siltation basin set up for the on-site work? Is that correct?
That is correct. If you remember, to the south side, there's a narrow connection from what we're calling wetland B north to what we're calling wetland B south, which is another area that's isolated that has been used in the past for as a sedimentation basin. There's actually phragmites in there, cattails, and I remember from exploring the soils there that you had a foot or so of loose sediment that probably got in there at some point, much before anything that we're dealing with right now. So that was the existing quote unquote sedimentation basin for that edge of the property. And then I think what they were trying to do here is to bring that swale and through the edge to that pre-existing area. And I think it got clogged, and maybe it's a little bit of an earthen, the dirt is a little higher up, or it got clogged, so it backed up the water to some extent. Not, I mean, it is a depressional area. It would have been filled with water anyhow. But that's kind of sort of the progression of what I see there from my understanding of it, at least.
So George, do you have an idea as to what the purpose of the sedimentation basin was originally? Or can somebody else answer that? I'm just curious as to, one, why it was created, and then to follow up on that, why it's no longer needed. Is the activity that needs to be conducted, is that no longer taking place on site?
Well, my understanding is this: when this work was being done, they wanted a place to get the water to. So they didn't go to the pond, didn't go to the Farmington River, but it went to somewhere where it would stay there and infiltrate. And that was the idea of getting that swale that you see there, those aerials, down to that area, and it ended up with all the work that was done around it to creating this depressional area. Obviously, because the land got raised on two sides at least, right? So it kind of isolated, and the water kind of connected there. But that was the idea. Now it's not needed anymore because either this area has been sufficiently stabilized, at least to a great extent, and so it has been abandoned. And plus, what happened at that time, if you see the early picture, there was a pitch from the west coming to the east and then down here, and then when all that soil from the berm got placed, it raised it up, so the water couldn't get there anyhow anymore. But in the early portions of the operation, that's what was happening.
So that sedimentation basin was not initially put in to minimize any type of sedimentation associated with specific activities of the project. It was more just for trying to collect sediment and infiltrate water. Am I hearing that correctly?
For the most part. I mean, I can't completely, I wish that, Stanley or would probably be the best person to talk about that, but that's my understanding from talking about it, that when they were doing this operation, they needed to get the water out somewhere, and so they decided to create that swale in the early portions of the operation, and then as it progressed, they didn't need it anymore, but it was there because they created it.
Okay, again, I'm only asking because usually when you see a sedimentation basin go in somewhere, it's typically because there's some activity that is going to trigger the need for that. So I'm just trying to make sure that I understand if there was or was not a specific activity being conducted on that site, which would have required the implementation of a sedimentation basin. And I think what I'm hearing is it was not set up for any specific activity done on site, but more just for general control of erosion measures and infiltrating back into the ground, the water.
I think that's probably a good way of looking at it.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I understood, because the last thing that I want to really consider is filling in wetland B, even though it's man-made, if there was a reason why it was built or dug in the first place, and that reason is still on site. So I think I know where you're coming from on this. That was sort of the bigger issue that I had. And in terms of the Hall Road, that is something that you're looking to sort of recreate that area. Is that correct?
Correct. And of course, we're not going to recreate a Hall Road.
No, I understand that.
That ship has sailed. So,
yeah.
So what we're going to do here is actually, at the end of the day, enhance it. So it won't be a Hall Road anymore. It will be a bona fide wetland that's created and restored that's going to look mostly like what's to the south of it, hopefully even a little nicer as far as biodiversity.
Okay, so where the original Hall Road was, that is now part of the mitigation that you're looking at doing, or the recreation of wetlands, correct?
Right, that's the restoration of the wetland that
Okay.
we feel.
All right. I'm just trying to make sure that I have a clear picture in my head. So,
Understood.
okay, I think that's all I have right now. So, Emily, you had asked me to come back to you later.
Let's just keep it cruising.
Okay. But I think based on comments from some other folks, I'd like to hear from Ed. I'm hoping that you've had a chance to take a look at some of this stuff, and I'm curious as to what your thought process is on this.
Sure. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. For the record, this is Ed Pollack, soil scientist, professional wetland scientist with Connecticut Ecosystems. I did receive a copy of this letter from REMA dated January 15th, 2021. And I did have a chance to review it. And I have some comments for you. The first thing I would like to say is I think that although this is a 40% effort towards a full mitigation plan, it certainly provides a lot more detail on what the applicant is envisioning in terms of a mitigation plan. And I think that it can go, and it is going a long way towards undoing a lot of the confusion that existed among the commissioners and myself about the previous iteration of the mitigation plan. So, you know, more detail is always better. And so I do appreciate the effort. I do think that it was time well spent for everybody who's reviewing it. So that's a good thing. And of course, it still has a ways to go, but it certainly is. The mitigation plan is now it's evolved in its location, but it's also evolving in the amount of detail that's provided. So that's a good thing. I do support as I have stated previously, the full restoration of wetland A. The prior iteration of the mitigation plan did not propose to restore the entirety of the disturbed wetland A. I voiced that I thought that was appropriate to fully restore it, and that's been done, is being proposed here. So that's a good thing. I support it. Now, regarding the proposed 25-foot wide demarcation buffer adjacent to the north edge of a restored wetland A. First of all, I am in support of several commissioners who expressed a concern that by approving, let's say, a 25-foot wide buffer and demarcated by plantings, that the commission would be held in the future to a supporting of a 25-foot buffer in the event that some development is eventually proposed north of wetland A. And I fully agree with that. In no way, you know, right now there's nothing, no development is proposed north of wetland A, so it's impossible to say, well, you know, how much of a buffer is appropriate in this circumstance. Well, we don't have a development proposal, so I'm okay with a 25-foot wide buffer as a placeholder, and I think it is very important to put it in the record as such that that this will be revisited and certainly can be expanded if in the future development proposal is submitted to the commission for some type of development activity north of wetland A and that 25-foot wide demarcation buffer. If it's an intensive development, 25 feet is, in my professional opinion, would be inadequate. But for now, as a placeholder, I'm okay with that. But I do want to also, I want to point out that I think it's completely appropriate, and I think the commission, I recommend the commission request that the entire upland review area associated with Wetland A, which previously was all green, was all vegetated. You see that on some of the historic aerial photographs that were previously submitted by REMA, that entirety of the URA, upland review area, be restored, be revegetated. Not just this 25-foot demarcation buffer. So I'd like to see that entire upland review area, which I think is 150-foot wide, be revegetated. Previously, I believe Mr. Logan was proposing to establish a meadow community out there to be mowed once annually. I'm fine with that. I'm not saying that should be the ultimate disposition of a buffer associated with wetland A, but I'd like to see that entire 150-foot wide URA revegetated, and that, in a sense, that kind of makes that 25-foot wide demarcation buffer a bit of a moot point. Really, it's the entirety of that URA was disturbed through vegetation clearing and filling, and it should be put back in place. Particularly, as I pointed out on the site walk, now it's really a barren area. It's lightly vegetated, but it's barren. It's supporting invasive mugwort, and it's providing very little functional support to wetland A. I'd like also, given the filling that's taken place on this property, that some type of demarcation be made along the edge of that 150-foot wide URA, whether it's medallions on posts or similar. But so there'll be no question in the future as to where the limit of that URA is, and that there should be no disturbance in that zone without a permit from this commission. Now, regarding the slope of a restored demarcation buffer, in my professional opinion, 3-to-1, a 3-to-1 slope that's too steep. That's quite a steep slope. If you think about it, a 3-to-1 slope means if you take a big step out, that's going to be about 3 feet. At least it is for me. I've got long legs. When you go out 3 feet, a 3-to-1 slope means that you've climbed 1 foot in that going out a horizontal distance of 3 feet. That's a steep slope, and water will move rapidly along that slope. And ultimately, if there is some development proposed north of Wetland A, you want any stormwater that's going to be running off that development area to be moving slowly and gently across the vegetated buffer before it reaches Wetland A. And the steeper the slope, the faster that water will move across that buffer and enter Wetland A. Conversely, the more gentle the slope, the more opportunity that stormwater runoff will have to contact vegetation in the slope, to filter it, to remove sediments and other pollutants. So I'm recommending, instead of that 3-to-1 slope, a 10-to-1 slope. So if you went out 10 feet, you would gain 1 foot in vertical. That's a gentler slope. Water will move more slowly across it. And I'd say, both for the existing conditions, and if any development takes place, that's a better arrangement for that buffer. I was happy to see that 2 exploratory test pits were dug in the area of the proposed wetland mitigation. I would request that Mr. Logan provide the soil logs for those exploratory trenches, both to me and to the commission. And perhaps not surprisingly, um, Mr. Logan encountered, I guess, a similar underlying layer of silt loam, compact silt loam fill, reddish silt loam fill, underlying the surface soils in that area. That's a similar condition to what he observed with the 6 exploratory trenches to the north side of wetland A to determine the wetland boundary that was in the fill area. So apparently you've got these compact red subsoils, fill material that was placed in this general area. And just as that compact silt loams fill subsoil is holding up water in wetland A and is perching the groundwater table, the plan here is to rely upon that restrictive subsoil to also hold up the water in the mitigation area. So hypothetically, you know, that would work. You'd have that same perching condition. However, you need more information to know whether in fact it will work. Because the mitigation area will not rely upon excavating into a seasonal high water table, but instead will rely upon water entering the mitigation area, the depressional mitigation area, and being perched there above that restrictive compact fill material. You need to be reassured that the drainage area of that mitigation area will be sufficient to create a wetland hydrology in that mitigation area. You need to know how large is the drainage area that's going to be providing runoff coming down into that mitigation area. And the applicant has to convince you that enough water will be coming off the adjacent upland areas down and coming down into that constructed depressional area to allow a wetland hydrology to develop. And right now, I don't think that anybody can make that determination. It will be necessary, I believe, for the applicants to survey survey the existing topography of the mitigation area, the existing wetland, adjacent wetland A, and then the surrounding uplands that would be contributing water to that mitigation area. That is the drainage area that will be supplying surface water to that mitigation area. So you can't estimate or calculate a drainage area for that mitigation area without having accurate topography for the surrounding landscape. So if that exists already from, you know, other sources, great, but you do need one way or the other, whether it's available already or whether more topography needs to be taken out there. You need detailed information on to determine just where is water going to be coming from to enter that wetland A. Will it be spilling over from the adjacent wetland A, or will it be coming from the uplands? You need to know that, and the applicant needs to demonstrate that. And I'd like to know just how the proposed grades in the mitigation area will compare to the existing topography in the adjacent wetland A. How do those two pieces fit together? Will they be excavated to a similar depth, elevation depth? Will the restoration area or mitigation area be deeper? We would like to know that information. Support the control of the concentrated invasive. That's a good idea. The 2 deeper sumps. Well, let me talk about those when I now move into wetland B. Regarding the proposed filling of wetland B, I agree with Mr. Logan that the information he's provided, the aerial photos he's provided, does suggest that this was a recently constructed sediment basin, both in that it does not appear in earlier aerial photos, and it does appear that there's a swale coming from those two big sand piles bringing water down to this area. So that seems to make sense. I do, need to point out that it is nonetheless, despite the fact that it was recently constructed and that it was, it's an excavated area, it is a regulated wetland or watercourse, one or the other, based upon the state statutes. And of course, it is an avoidable regulated activity. But if the commission does determine that it's appropriate to fill that wetland B, you need to understand that appreciate that due to its hydrology, which is either seasonally or semi-permanently flooded. I don't have enough information to make that determination, but several times that I observed it, it held water, and I saw water there in the photos on the SharePoint site. So that hydrology makes it a suitable habitat for the breeding and development of at least one amphibian species, the American toad, and perhaps others. It hasn't been studied closely. That alone increases its value. It wasn't by design, it certainly wasn't intentional, and it's just due to circumstances of drainage area, of surrounding topography, which pinch, as George said, a pinch point that kind of prevents water from leaving the area to the wetland to the south, as well as the underlying soils, which are compact and are restrictive. Because of those conditions, that's an unintentionally created amphibian breeding habitat. So, and that certainly has value. American toad, that's an important amphibian species. This is the type of habitat, these kind of sandy soils are very suitable for it. So I'm not at all surprised that it's on the landscape. And so you want to, if you were to permit the filling of that wetland B, you want to be assured that it has been recreated elsewhere. And right now, all you have are lines, grading lines drawn on a mitigation plan showing where the applicant intends to basically recreate that wetland B, or at least the hydrologic conditions that are present in wetland B. But I strongly feel that the commission should never trade an existing function of a wetland for lines on a plan. The applicant, I think, has responsibility. If the commission does permit that filling, the applicant has a responsibility to, first of all, demonstrate that they believe that the proposed mitigation is likely to successfully create that seasonally or semi-permanently flooded hydrology. And then if they can convince the commission of that, then they have to demonstrate through monitoring the hydrologic and biologic characteristics of, particularly of those two pools in the mitigation area. I'll ultimately provide more detail on that, but I'm going to be recommending regular inspections, if this is approved, during the breeding season within the two pools of that wetland B to determine the depth and duration of ponding, if it does occur there, as well as the biological activity that may or may not take place in there. And if through monitoring, if it's determined that the proper hydrology was not created in wetland B and it's neither seasonally flooded nor seasonally or semi-permanently flooded, then modifications will need to be made to those pools, or an alternate mitigation site will have to be selected and created. So that function exists now on the site, and the commission, I believe, has a responsibility to be ensured that it is in fact replicated appropriately. I will note that the landscape setting of the mitigation area, it is more naturalized than the landscape setting around the existing wetland B. So in that sense, it is a better place to have, if you're going to have breeding pools on the property, tucked in adjacent to that western edge of wetland A. Well, that's a better place, I believe, to have it. It's a more naturalized area. It's grown up more than the landscape around wetland B, which is, you know, more highly disturbed. Before I leave wetland B, I wasn't actually aware, because I hadn't explored it, the area to the south of wetland B, which I believe Mr. Logan described as the southern lobe of wetland B. And you could see that, thanks Shannon, I know it's on one of the photos, aerial photos, shows it really well. The pinch point between the delineated wetland B and ponded area to the south. Oh,
Yeah.
Just
Come
up.
on. There we go. These two?
Yeah, perfect. Right. So you can see that area that Mr. Logan was describing, or I think he was mentioning, observed cattails and phragmites there. I've not explored that area at all, but given the unpermitted filling of wetlands that has taken place on this property within the past year, I recommend that the commission request that the applicant have that southern lobe of wetland be delineated, surveyed, and put on a map for posterity, so that there's no question if in the future there's any disturbance there, that this area was determined to be a regulated wetland at this time. And finally, regards to this wetland B, actually it's an area to the west which has not been delineated as a wetland, but you'll recall in my previous letter I included some photos of it's a similarly ponded area. It may have been a sedimentation basin as well, I don't know, but it was ponded each time that I observed it.
I think it's over here.
Yeah, it's to the west of wetland B.
It's off the stone.
Okay, that's the approximate area. I have requested previously that that area be explored, and a determination made as to whether it is a regulated area or not. I have not heard that that's been accomplished, but it should be. And if it is a regulated area, the applicants should indicate what they intend to do with that area, whether to maintain it, or if it's as well in a work zone, it's proposed to be eliminated, that should be compensated for as well. And finally, with regard to the pre-existing haul road, well, quite honestly, I think it's a moot point now, given that the entirety of wetland A is proposed to be restored. So whether or not there was a haul road there, and it certainly seems from these photos there was, that really doesn't matter, because that area is proposed to be fully restored. And so I think really any more discussion of the conditions of that haul road, it's an academic discussion at most. So there you have it. Those are my comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
I don't know about anybody else, but my head's spinning. Ed, I do have a question for you. I mean, and I don't know if this is something that is doable or not, but I guess over by where wetland B is, it looks as though, and I'm looking on one of the maps that was provided by George, where it shows the delineation of the 100-year flood elevation. And there's a portion of that 100-year flood elevation that runs north, yeah, right in that area. Is that something that might theoretically be a beneficial area for maybe trying to do some mitigation? I mean, you know, with a 100-year flood, it may get up, but if you've got some pockets in there similar to what you've got with Wetland B, I don't want to say Wetland B acts as a decoy pond because you're actually seeing enough water in there for the tadpoles to survive and grow, and I'm assuming hop out on their own. But if that was something, you know, that if it was man-made to start with, is that something that maybe you could tap into that 100-foot flood elevation as a way of maybe getting a little more natural water in there based on flooding control, but yet you've got a little bit of a depression so that you still maintain the water in there in addition to any type of surface drainage?
That's an interesting point. We can't determine from this map because wetland B is not shown. Just, you know, what is the relationship of wetland B to that 100-foot flood line, the floodplain line? What I would say, just, you know, off the top of my head, is that I wouldn't want to rely on the hydrology provided by a 100-year flood to support the hydrology of that the mitigation area, or whether it's supporting the hydrology of wetland B, because it's just, you know, its return interval is 100 years, at least theoretically. So it's, you know, you'd expect it wouldn't be that area wouldn't be flooding every year. Yet you want to have an amphibian breeding habitat to be flooded on an annual basis, seasonally or semi-permanently flooded annual basis. So, you know, I wouldn't want to rely solely upon that hydrology of a 100-year flood. If the area does happen to flood and it inundates a basin, an excavated depression, then it's great. You know, then that's additional water.
Okay. No, I was just curious. Thank you.
I could speak to that if you'd like. So this is George Logan for the record. Ed, you might remember that when the first time we were out there and we were approaching the affected area, that I dipped into, there's a little purple loosestrife right there at the edge, and we dipped into this ditch.
Right.
That I said went that way and then turned around. That's that low spot, which is encumbered by the floodplain elevation. That's that ditch that then turns around and goes the other way towards the pond. So just for clarification.
Okay, thanks. But that ditch doesn't extend up to wetland B, does it?
I don't think it does totally, but
It does not, no.
Yeah, I can't do these.
Yeah, it's hard to see it on that.
It is, yeah. And I can't get them up side by side with this. I can't split screen. So we would need to have it surveyed and shown here to know definitively.
Well, we do know under existing conditions that excavated wetland B does pond and trap water. It receives surface water runoff. It ponds it and it traps it, and it holds it for an extended period of time. The proposed mitigation area is outside of the 100-foot floodplain zone, so we wouldn't be expecting that the flooding in a 100 your storm is going to be coming up there, or that it arrives up to wetland B. So we shouldn't rely upon it. The surface water would have to be coming during more frequent storms from the in the drainage area.
I think we need to be mindful too, and Army Corps and DEP are staying at the periphery of this and continue to be updated. It's been a month or two since I've had to update anybody at this point. But they're looking and trying to maintain assurance that there is not a hydraulic connection to the pond, because we do know with certainty that the pond is connected to the Farmington River. So I think in order to keep these things separate, it's actually perhaps preferred to keep this so there is not a hydraulic connection to the pond in order to maintain a more, I'll say, straightforward approach to getting this implemented for all parties involved. So I'll leave it at that.
That's a good point.
So,
So Ed, I want to thank you for your comments on that. And I'll start with Guy. If you have any questions for Ed.
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, Ned.
he's got to be on mute.
Ned's muted.
He's muted. Mr.
Sorry,
Chapman.
no, I don't have any questions at this time.
Thank you.
Mark.
I have no questions at this time.
Robert.
No comments. Thank you, Ed. I appreciate the input that you had for the commission. That's all.
Dave.
To thank Ed as well. I was wondering about the 10-to-1 slope recommendation. That would make the buffer area pretty large.
I didn't quite understand that, Dave.
If with a 10-to-1 slope, if the top of that slope is going to be the end of the buffer area, isn't that maybe we would get our 50-foot buffer that way?
That's a good question. It depends upon the depth of the fill, I believe, because you're starting at the edge of the wetland, and then you're imposing this 10-to-1 slope, and then depending upon the depth of fill, that will determine how far out you have to go. And I think that's actually what Mr. Logan was kind of referring to when he said it's not possible, given the topography that we have today, to know just whether a 3-to-1 slope that he was proposing would get you to the basically to meet the existing grade or not. But given the depth of fill that Mr. Logan encountered in those exploratory trenches, as I recall, it was somewhere maybe a little bit more than 2 feet of fill over the buried topsoil that he found. A 10-to-1 slope would take 20 feet out to get up 2 feet of vertical. So I don't know that it would necessarily push that beyond, say, a 25-foot line if there is in fact just 2 feet of fill over existing the buried topsoil. But I'd like to hear what Mr. Logan, what he has to say about that.
I think, I'd have to go back and look. I think, maybe an average is 2 to 3 feet. There's a few points where it might be a little more than that, actually. So that's why I said I have to go back. And at the end of the day, I think we might have to, just cover that area with a few points so we can get a little more accuracy as to what's going on there. And Ed, I don't necessarily disagree with you that 3-to-1 might be a little on the steep side. 3-to-1 is what? 33 point something percent slope, if I get my math right. So, you know, if it was well vegetated, dense, it shouldn't be a problem. So just to be on the conservative side, you know, obviously I would look for something more than 3-to-1. I just said that that would be the least, the maximum slope. So anyhow, that's something to explore and come back to the commission about.
Dave, was that it?
Yeah, that was it. Oh, I just wanted to say that I thought the idea of monitoring those created pools in order to ensure that they work was a good idea. We should keep that in mind. That's it.
All right, thanks. Emily?
I have nothing at this time, and yes, it is 33.3%.
I don't really have a whole lot at this point in time. My head is, like I said, it's still swimming around some of the comments. I know one of the things that, you know, maybe we can take a look at is, you know, maybe the 3-to-1 is too steep. 10-to-1 would be better, but maybe there's something in the middle. I'd be curious as to how the area could be stabilized. You know, in terms of construction purposes, is there a way to sort of slow down water going down any of the slopes to at least let the ground area take hold? You know, and actually one of the other things I was thinking about as far as trying to stabilize, you know, whatever slope we end up with, assuming this goes forward, and whether it's a 3-to-1 slope, a 10-to-1 slope, I'm just wondering whether or not this might be an area that would be conducive to planting pollinator species. I don't know, what's your take on that, George?
I'm all for it. So, yeah, we have the space, and you know, even if this gets a little larger, that's fine to do that.
I mean, and then you'd end up seeing some natural growth. I mean, I'm sure some trees are going to come in, but having, you know, an area that is stabilized by using a pollinator species, I think that helps in a number of different ways, rather than just throwing grass in that's got to be mowed once a year or something like that. So I'm just trying to think sort of outside of the box on it.
Yeah, so let me clarify. So you're not just talking about, well, our intent was, well, we didn't specifically say what we would do in the within the demarcation buffer. As I said in my report, that's something to be worked out. So I'm all for doing something that would stabilize it, and if that included pollinator species, that'd be great. But also on top of that, for the rest of the upland review area, you know, based on the report that I mentioned earlier, which is out there somewhere, we would specify a seed mix that would have, will create a warm season habitat, a grassy meadow habitat, to the extent that it would, you know, some of it will naturalize. Obviously, you have a lot of staghorn sumac and probably some winged sumac that has come in, and that will continue happening. But we can augment a seed mix to include pollinator species there. I have a list. Well, there's several commercially available native pollinator seed mixes from at least a couple of sources that I can think of. But we've also, what we've done in the past, and this is for instance, some of the solar projects, is to specify and tailor our own seed mix from getting individual seed sources from, say, Ernst Conservation Seed Mixes, putting them together for our region, and creating our own pollinator mix. And so we could probably do something similar here.
I mean, if an area has to be restabilized, to me, if we can do something like that, it's beneficial. rather than just throwing grass seed mixed down, whatever the composition is of it. At least this way you're creating, I think, a more favorable environment for a number of different species, and it all blends well together from a natural perspective. So I'd be looking at something like that.
Certainly will incorporate it. Good idea. Thank you.
I mean, I can't think of anything else at this point in time. I mean, I'll go back and I'll take a look at some of the stuff, and after my head stops spinning a little bit to try to figure out, you know, how we're going. But I mean, I think some of the comments I've heard from people tonight, though, is I think we appear to be going in the right direction. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. We're seeing some plans come in. We're able to start taking a look at them, make some comments. There are some things that we need to think about. I'm not ready to take an action on Wetland B tonight. That's something I've got to think about more. And my guess is the rest of the commission is pretty much the same way, because I think this is something that's, you know, relatively new that we're looking at. And I don't think that we had really anticipated that, because last time we met, we were talking about the concrete barriers going up and going to the east of Wetland B to try to maintain it. Now the plans are changing again a little bit. So I just think we're going to need some time to think about that. But I do want to thank George for time and work that he's putting in. I think we're starting to go, like I say, in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
So Shannon, sort of where are we now in the grand scheme of plans?
Okay, so obviously you know, this has been advanced, as George said, to about 40%. So I think we've got a couple of options at this point. It sounds one, and if I'm mischaracterizing in my summation, then by all means, let me know. But it sounds like in general with the wetland creation area, conceptually, everyone seems to be on board with that, including Ed. And I think the comments that Ed provided are really, those are the comments that are needed to take this to the next step, whether we call it a 60% or a 75%, with respect to getting survey, understanding the actual elevations that are out in that mitigation area, and how they compare to wetland A. And I think the same thing holds true for the buffer area, is to start to get some solid data, so we start to understand, and perhaps you know, if we get some solid survey information, then perhaps that allows for some cross sections, you know, 1 or 2 cross sections through there, 2 or 3 cross sections through there, so everyone can start to visualize how that buffer area ties to wetland A and ties to then the upland area. So I think we need to see this continue to advance. It sounds like, you know, there certainly wasn't anyone saying, no, absolutely not, this is the wrong direction. So I think we'd like to see, you know, those next steps taken so that this design can advance. With respect to wetland B and how to address that, I don't know if you want Ed's comments to be solidified in writing with respect to that, if we want additional information from George. We meet again in 2 weeks. Obviously, as we all know, our meeting in 2 weeks is going to be rather intensive. And we do have some flexibility with the agenda. If we think it's going to be a quick discussion, I mean, we're already an hour and a half into this evening. But if there's something quick to discuss on this in 2 weeks, we could reorganize the agenda and pop the public hearing down if it's something we think we can take care of in 15 or 20 minutes. Otherwise, we have a substantial public hearing that's going to take place in 2 weeks. And we're looking really a month from now. So I think we need to provide, and I'm open, tossing this out. So Wetland B, if we're talking about filling it, that decision kind of needs to be made by that first meeting in March, if we're going to avoid the breeding season for this year. We might have a little bit of leeway if Mother Nature decides to throw a hard freeze on us, but at the rate things are going, those frogs are going to be jumping here.
Okay, I just want to follow up on Wetland B for a moment. And George, first I'll go to you. My understanding, at least again, if I'm understanding the picture correctly, there was a bit of a swale that was created, which actually intercepted water and discharged that into a lower dugout area. So you had a swale that was created, which helped redirect water into what is now being identified as Wetland B, correct?
To some extent. So there it is. So the swale was trying to redirect water to the southern portion of Wetland B that Ed was saying should be delineated for posterity. And in doing so, and with the grading that happened around the northern portion, it created this other flooded lobe. But the intent was to get it to the pre-existing area that was used for sedimentation and water control purposes. So now, and by the way, even though I don't think any of us looked at it, when we were seeing the tadpoles in the northern portion of Wetland B, we never went and looked at the southern portion, but I would suspect that they were there too, and they will continue to be there. So that's a good thing. So even if this area was filled prior to, it's not like the frogs don't and the toads don't have somewhere to go. They do have somewhere to go, and they'll go there. But again, I can't say that with 100% certainty because I didn't look at it. But that's my
yeah, no, because kind of where I'm going with this, I mean, and you've seen designs for some of the solar projects, like you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
That you'll see some drainage swales incorporated around the perimeter of the site to redirect water to a specific sedimentation basin, detention basin, whatever.
Yep.
And I mean, I'm just wondering if this was created by putting in some drainage swales to start with. If this area was filled, would it still be possible to install some type of swale that could be stabilized to move the water further to the east and potentially enhance the wetland area over there? I mean, I'm just throwing that out against the wall. And Ed, I don't know, you may think I'm totally crazy on that, but if you had water coming from the western part of the site and it's at least ponding in an area, to me, it indicates you've got some water coming through there. But if that swale area were extended to the east, is that something that could help out in terms of maintaining water for the integrity of the wetlands for Wetland A?
That's a good question, and that's something that I would have to specifically contemplate without, saying something on top of my head, which I will. If you recall, when we got to the eastern edge of the existing construction area, we climbed up a little bit into the fill area. So I think the water that used to come this way doesn't come there anymore. The only water that gets to that northern portion of Wetland B is from what's to the north of it, and possibly a little to the west, to the east of it. But again, I'm kind of talking off the top of my head here. I don't.
So, George, so am I. So don't feel bad.
So, okay, I'm going to be out there doing stuff, so I can look into that and come back.
But again, I'm also curious, Ed, I mean, is that something that may be realistic? I mean, because we've used, drainage swales in the past to redirect water to get it to certain areas. I mean, and granted, we've got, some of the swales, they were planted with some specific species to help, with water quality. But I'm just wondering if something like that is something that we should be looking at too. I mean, and maybe not so much for wetland B, but taking that water and maybe getting it over more towards wetland A, which may sustain wetland A over a longer period of time.
Interesting thought. But I think it all goes to the sort of the process that George is going to have to go through in determining whether the drainage area for that proposed mitigation site is large enough to recreate that ponding hydrology that you're seeing right there in the photo in wetland B. So he's going to have to determine what is the drainage area, how much surface ground is going to contribute runoff down to the mitigation area that I'm proposing. And if it's small, well, then you might start considering, what you were envisioning, perhaps a swale to intercept runoff and to divert it and bring it over to the mitigation area. It may be that George determines, well, it's actually not necessary to do that. There's a pretty good sized drainage area already that's going to be contributing to this depression that we are proposing to create here. I would suggest, though, and for George to think about is as well to look at at least estimate the drainage area that's contributing to this wetland B. We know that wetland B, by accident, has at least a seasonally flooded hydrology. So you could look at how much land area is contributing to it, and that's successful over a wetland B. If you could provide at least that amount of drainage area over to the mitigation area, there would be some reassurance that that too would have a seasonally flooded hydrology, since it similarly will be underlain by compact restrictive layer soils.
And that's certainly something I'll be looking at. And that's a legitimate question that it has.
Okay, thank you, both of you. And I think I'm done.
This is Ned. I had one other comment, is that I know Ed has concerns in regards to saying, well, yeah, wetland B, wetland, the relocation area for wetland A, or recreation area for wetland A, or off of wetland A. It's tough to count on if it's only lines on paper, and that we have wetland B was something that's, kind of working. But if we go ahead with and include a monitoring period, so that we know that, well, if the wetland recreation area or wetland creation area isn't working, then they're obligated to make adjustments to get it to work. So I think the fact that it's still it's a much better place for the wetland as opposed to wetland B, right at the area, the middle of all the activity there. I think we might be worrying too much about whether or not it's going to work, and if we include the monitoring in our final recommendation, so that we know that it will work eventually, because I think the fact that it's relocated to a better area accounts for a lot. So that's just something I'm considering.
Right. Although if that's just a dry basin that's excavated, that won't be functional.
Right. But we'll know that with the monitoring, and then they'll have to, we'll have to figure out a way to make it work. They'll have that obligation.
So one of the things comes to mind is, and I'm not necessarily suggesting this, although it's kind of a novel idea. We know that there's water in wetland A. As a matter of fact, you saw the picture from the other day. Obviously, it's the high groundwater season right now. If one dug a hole in wetland A down to the confining layer, that would fill with water. So you would have a guaranteed pool. there. So that's possibly a fallback position. It means going in and doing a quote unquote enhancement of an existing wetland through shallow excavation, but that is an option. If say the two sumps somehow didn't work as well as we'd like them to.
George, could I ask a question? George, with respect to the 2 test pits that you did, and I apologize if it's documented, I've read quite a few documents over the last few days.
Sure.
What is the depth of the 2 test pits that you did within the mitigation area?
So I think the total was about 5.5 feet. So I went, and as you can see from the pictures, and I put one my auger there. I should have had a tape measure when I did it, but I didn't. I forgot it at the car, and I was too lazy to go get it. So I was using my auger as a measuring stick, if you will. But we went down minimum of 5 feet. So my auger is 42 inches, and it hasn't reached the top yet.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, so that kind of gives you an indication. And the other one is about the same.
Okay. And at any point, did you have water seepage in on any of the, I mean, it's tough to tell in the photos.
No, I didn't. And that's a good observation. And that's one that I'm mildly concerned about. But again, what that material there, the red material, is somewhat different from the material that's immediately underlays wetland A, which is a little more coarser. So the thing that we're going to have to figure out here is how we can key the mitigation of the created area to wetland A and to its watershed. And if we can do that, then we're going to have a guarantee. And sort of the conservative approach is also to utilize that organically rich topsoil that I'm talking about, which will, have a higher water carrying capacity also, which will keep things moist and wet for a longer period of time. So those are some of the thoughts that I'm having. But again, Ed is right. Hydrology.
Okay. Okay. It sounds like we don't necessarily need a written document from Ed, outlining his thoughts from this evening. I'm thinking maybe we'll say, let this advance to the next step. As you folks have additional information on, Wetland B, we can put this on the agenda for 2 weeks from now. See where everyone stands and then go from there. Does that?
Sure. I think the way that I'm looking at it is that at the far end, we're going to have detailed implementation notes. How we're going to do this? What's the procedure, et cetera? Planting schemes, seed mixes, et cetera. But that's out there. I think some of the things that Ed raised today, such as and to ensure the hydrology of the created area, and to look at the demarcation buffer and its slope, to look at some of those seed mixes that we could put in there for enhancing that. Those are all things that I can do first. Whether I do it in the next couple of weeks, yeah, I probably can do some of that in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
So we can at least advance it to the next point.
Okay. All right, and commission members, I guess, as you're reviewing this, if there's additional specific information or questions that come up with respect to wetland B, and what you would need in order to make a decision with respect to filling that. If something comes up, feel free to email me and then I will pass that along to both Ed and George simultaneously. So everyone's getting the question at the same time. We'll put it on the agenda for 2 weeks from now and see what else gets added to the agenda. And then we'll go from there with how we organize the agenda then for 2 weeks from now.
Okay. But I would like to thank everybody for a nice, healthy discussion this evening. I think it was very beneficial.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
So I think that's it for new business tonight.
I think so, unless Attorney Galsky, you have anything else to add on this matter? Otherwise, we're going to move on in our agenda to other items.
No, I'll just follow up on that other issue with the wood.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
Have a good
Thank you,
evening,
Joy.
everyone.
Thank you.
All right,
Good night.
take care. Thank you. Next up on planners report, 16 Clearbrook.
Clearbrook, yep, I just wanted
Next update.
to provide just a status update. So the owner has engaged, obviously, as you know, Ian Cole from the last meeting. He also has had Juliana Pools out. He has, rather than an engineer, they're working with a landscape architect on this. And so they're going to use the survey. They've got a recent survey in the as-built survey. So they'll be using a property survey to get this all laid out and have everything identified. So the owner's been fairly conscientious and following up and keeping us up to date. And sounds like he's engaged the appropriate professionals to continue to advance the plan for his backyard, as well as the restoration that's needed for some of the cutting that had taken place. So that's it for an update on that one. 1200 New Britain Avenue. The homeowner, the owner, homes under construction, but the owner has been reminded that a planting plan is needed for review with the commission. Again, all aspects seem to be stable, so we're not having any immediate concerns there with that particular property.
And this may not totally fall under planners report, but with the continuation of the hearing in 2 weeks, have we received any of the information from either Dr. Clemens or George? Because we were supposed to have it in by tomorrow, I think, weren't we?
By Friday. So the deadline for those documents is Friday. So we said February 22nd, or sorry, darn it, January 22nd. I did the same thing at the last meeting.
That's wishful thinking.
Oh, well, they just filed intervenor status today on the TPZ application as well. So, yeah. So, yeah, they have not. So there has been, and I apologize because I got to keep this straight, because there were new TPZ documents, but they were related to the zone change, architecture, and site lighting, of which is not germane for you folks. There has been no new environmental documents or delineation from Malone McBroom for the applicant. And at this time, we have not received official reports from the intervenor with respect to their environmental documents. They submitted some today that are new with the TPZ intervenor documentation. But I do not know if the intent is to also have those serve as the documents that intended to be submitted for the wetland intervenor documentation petition.
Okay, because if I remember the dialogue the last time, is this information was supposed to come in by the 22nd.
Correct.
To give the applicant a chance to go back, take a look at what was being submitted.
Correct.
Respond. I think they're supposed to respond by sometime the end of next week, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. But I need all documentation in by the 29th so that I can get it posted for all of you and to get the agenda review and the listing of the documents. I don't know that I'm gonna, you know, my synthesis of these documents is probably not relevant. It was also suggested by the attorney for the intervener that perhaps a third-party review was going to be needed of these documents due to their technical nature. I have been on the phone with our attorney, town attorney, Bob DiCrescenzo, and he confirmed a number of my thoughts, one being that you are not obligated, you are not required to get a third-party review on anything. Two, we already have, we've got the soil scientist and team for the applicant, we have the soil scientist and team for the intervener. I'm not sure there's a huge benefit in introducing yet a third, literally third party into this to review anything. You know, these are well-respected soil scientists on both sides with years of experience that should be more than capable of synthesizing this information so that it is understood by all of us. Period.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't see a reason for a third party to be involved in this. I mean, basically, you have experts on both sides presenting their information, and they need to explain it clear enough so that the commission understands their position, what they're proposing. And if we have two different opinions, that's fine, but they're two different experts and we can pick what we do or don't like about each one of them.
Yeah. But like I said, I received documents today at the end of the day from Attorney Ainsworth with respect to the TPZ notice of intervention. And I don't know if his intent is for those documents to also serve as the documents to be submitted for the wetlands. I will be obviously corresponding with him tomorrow and Friday to get that clarified. So I know whether they're, who he is intending to direct these to. If it's to both commissions or if there's separate documents coming in for wetlands.
Okay.
Hopefully they're not separate documents. Hopefully it's the same documentation, but I need to confirm.
Yeah, but they can submit something to TPZ that just deals with TPZ issues and doesn't address what they spoke to us about.
The items articulated in the intervener petition are virtually identical between the two petitions.
Okay. All right, I just wanted to bring that up because that impacts all of us in terms of whether or not the material comes in a timely fashion.
Yeah, no, it's been clear with all parties that it needs to come in by Friday and then any rebuttals in by the following Friday.
Okay.
And Sandy and I will also work through the statutory timeframes so that we know where we stand with those and the need for any extensions from the applicant.
Okay. So I guess we can move on to minutes now, unless you have any other comments.
No, I don't have anything else.
All right. So we have minutes of January 6th, 2021. Can I get a motion to approve?
We'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second?
By Robert. Oh,
Ah, you got it, Robert.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions, comments, corrections?
None for me.
Hearing none. Those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining. So be it. So we'll adjourn wetlands at 8:49. Start Conservation Commission at 8:49. And the only thing on the agenda there, at least unless there's some invisible ink here, is approved minutes of the January 6th Conservation Commission meeting.
Just two small, I mean, obviously the land acquisition meeting for January was canceled, so that's
Right.
why there's no update. And then just two items that may be of interest for folks. We got our simple recycling, the textile recycling volume numbers for December, the 4,000 pounds for Farmington, so two tons. So interestingly, we continue to stay right in that somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 pound range of textile recycling pretty much on a monthly basis. And we're 1 year into this. So it's a notable amount that's been removed from the landfill and been put into recycling. So that's a great accomplishment. And then just a very early notification, household hazardous waste collection, electronic recycling, and shredding is set for April 24th. So we had to cancel this spring's event. We did hold it to the summer and fall event in Simsbury, but we're hopefully confident that we'll be able to execute the event here in Farmington this year and have all the COVID protocols in place to allow that to take place.
Oh, the one question I would have about the Household Hazardous Waste Collection Day is, would we have to do things differently? Because we go from car to car with the clipboard, the pens, the pencils, or are we going to be needing to wear disposable gloves, things of that nature? So has anybody thought that through?
I'm sure they have, Bob, because like I said, they've done this in Simsbury. They did it in Simsbury in June and in October. So while we had to cancel our April one because it was so close to the onset of the pandemic and trying to figure out what all the proper protocols were. At that point, we were still basically in a complete shutdown and hadn't started really our phase 1, phase 2 reopenings. So at this point, all the DPWs have all their protocols in place. Things have been going actually fairly well. I'm not aware of any issues that took place at the June or October. I don't know all of the different protocols that were in place in order to make that happen. But I'm assuming everybody was masked, everybody had gloves on. Folks stayed in their cars, which I think they pretty much did anyhow. So there was minimal interaction with public. And whether or not we would, I know historically we have had the Conservation Commission members help out with the verification of driver's licenses and folks coming in. Whether or not we would have that take place for this event, I don't know, but I can certainly follow up with Russ Arnold and Jim Rusbason, because Mr. Zanke has retired. I don't know if everybody knows that, but Scott retired in November. So it's Jim Rusbason has taken the head as superintendent of highway and grounds.
Yeah, I mean, my concern was more for commission members because of how we've typically staffed it.
Sure.
So that's something I'd like to figure out what our role might be, assuming that we're asked to participate again.
Yep, I will. I'll find out on that in what particulars, and obviously, as always, it's been a voluntary request for the commission. So we'll find out what the protocols are, and then if folks are not comfortable, you certainly aren't obligated. It just means we call in additional staff members to try to work through some of this.
I mean, if we can maybe have the information by the second meeting in February, I mean, it gives people a little bit of an opportunity to figure out whether that's a good weekend to take off.
Yeah, understood.
Okay. All right, so if there's nothing else, we have approved the minutes of January 6, 2021 for the Conservation Commission meeting. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved, Statchen.
Is there a second?
Second, Statchen.
Okay. Any questions, comments, corrections?
No, sir.
Hearing none. Those in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstaining? They're in. So 8:54, we'll close the Conservation Commission meeting, and hopefully everybody is doing well, families are safe, and trying to get back to normal, whatever that is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, thank you everyone for calling in this evening. And I will, as soon as the information comes in, I will turn around and get it out to you regarding the 402 Farmington Ave. And try to keep everyone up to date on that. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank
and
you.
a lot.
Good
Have a
night.
good evening,
Good
everybody.
night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.